Supermoves World of Parkour was a platformer racing game which could be played in both first and third person perspective. The game released in August 2024 and was delisted not even a year later in June 2025. The online servers have shut down, but all owners of the game can continue to play the game in a single player offline mode. I personally played the game via the Freerun version, which allowed players to access the starter content of the single player career mode of the game and all multiplayer content. Unfortunately, with the delisting of Supermoves, the Freerun version has been deactivated and became unplayable. The multiplayer section allowed for up to 40 players in a race and featured 8 different game modes. There were, for example, classic sprint races, bomb tech stages where the last player exploded, rising tide levels which slowly flooded the entire map, and obstacle parkour races. Alternatively, players could also compete in battle royale or tournament formats. While this in theory sounded pretty fun, barely anybody got to experience it. Supermoves suffered from a lack of players since the get-go. I queued a couple of times but never met another player and always had to compete in bot-only races. I think a big reason for that was that Supermoves released with a €15 price tag and not many players were willing to give it a chance. By the time the free-to-play Freerun version released a month after launch, the game had already lost interest for most players. The daily player peak usually stayed below 10, and most of those were just playing the single-player content. Online multiplayer was shut down together with the Battle Pass and the Makea level editor in June 2025. A bit of a shame, especially since the level editor was not only quite good, but also allowed you to design your own custom maps together with friends online. This is a pretty cool feature that, for example, the already shut down game creation game Crater had as well, a game which I also reviewed on this channel. The single-player campaign featured levels from 10 different biomes and varied between classic races, obstacle courses and more classic platformer collectathon stages. There was a good variety, and in some of them the bots could actually pose a serious challenge. Before we end the retrospective review, let's also talk a little bit more about the actual gameplay. Supermoves was very fast paced, which is obviously great for speedrunning of stages and highly competitive races. The movement felt very fluent and generally had a good flow. Aside from just running, you could also grind rails like Tony Hawk, slide and wall jump like in Mirror's Edge, or use one of your supermove abilities. These abilities, for example, included a variety of different flips, which could allow you to simply bypass obstacles and could therefore be used strategically in speedruns. I also really liked how the game allowed you to switch between first and third person perspective. While I thought that the first person perspective was more immersive and felt even more like Mirror's Edge, admittedly not in the same quality but with undeniable similarities, the third person perspective actually gave a better overview of the stage and therefore made it easier to identify the quickest route throughout each map. I also didn't like how when using a flip the camera always switched briefly from first to third person perspective and back. The transition never felt smooth. One of the biggest problems of Supermoves should also not be left unmentioned. The game suffered since the beginning from pretty severe performance issues. It honestly feels nowadays more noteworthy if a game has a stellar performance than if it's flawed. These issues were even worse for me since I was still using my old PC last year, which probably contributed to this. Nonetheless, nearly every Steam review at launch was mentioning the performance problems as well, and the developers had to release hotfixes in the following weeks and months. Unfortunately, this is a very common occurrence for Unreal Engine 5 games. Supermoves was a good game, but in 2024 or 2026, that in itself is not enough to be able to survive. Since around a decade, we live in an era of free-to-play games. The best buy-to-play games can still be incredibly successful, but especially in terms of multiplayer games, it is very difficult for games with a price point to compete, if they are only good and not great. Supermoves, in addition to the price point, also suffered from the fact that parkour platformers remain a rather niche genre. The severe performance problems at launch and overall lower quality in comparison to games like Mirror's Edge easily explain Supermoves' downfall. Supermoves World of Parkour gets a 6.5 out of 10 from me. In this sense, thanks for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.